America imports over $100 billion of food products a year, one of the highest totals in the world. That includes more than half of its fruit and seafood. President Donald Trump has threatened tariffs on some of the U.S.'s biggest food sources, which could affect tons of products Americans consume.
Everyday Americans are going to be the ones paying the prices of tariffs.
So, which countries feed America the most? And what's at stake if trading relations fizzle? About half of America's fruit and vegetable imports come from Mexico, and the U.S. put a 25% tariff on all these products.
It's to protect domestic suppliers. Second, it's to incentivize foreign suppliers to make their products at a lower price so that they're competitive on the American market. And third, it's for political leverage.
The U.S. gets about 90% of its avocados from Mexico, over $2 billion worth in 2024. In Mexico, they're so valuable that farmers have formed militias to protect farms from cartels.
Thank you very much.
It all started in 1993 when the U.S. signed the North American Free Trade Agreement.
I believe we have made a decision now that will permit us to create an economic order in the world that will promote more growth, more equality, better preservation of the environment, and a greater possibility of world peace.
It lifted an 83-year ban on avocado imports from Mexico. Americans went from eating about a pound of avocados a year in 1994 to more than 7 pounds of avocados in 2018. Imports from Mexico exploded in this same time period. And the business is so lucrative that even the deadly violence hasn't stopped other newcomers from trying to break in, even though the best land is taken. Eduardo Montero and his partners are growing avocado trees on the side of a mountain that is rocky and exposed.
Pero aquí podemos ver en lo que es la ramita de la flor el golpe del granizo.
Still, his family is well aware of how to deal with cartels.
Nos ha tocado de que nos cobran piso. Simplemente somos agricultores y nos cobran piso. Llegan que por protección.
If Eduardo can make it work, though, a 76-acre farm like his could bring in more than $200,000 in revenue at each harvest, with multiple harvests every year. And if the cartels charge him at local rates, he could probably expect to pay them about $68,000 in what is called piso, or protection money. Meanwhile, the world's love affair with avocados is expected to keep on growing.
More than 80% of the limes Americans consume come from Mexico. This farm in Veracruz can harvest 3,000 of them a day, despite droughts that have squeezed the industry. Once they're picked, workers load them onto trucks and bring them to the processing facility.
Empezamos nuestro proceso con el área de vaciado.
Each one gets washed with a detergent disinfectant.
Para retirar cualquier tipo de suciedad, polvo que pueda traer de campo la fruta.
And hit with a spray of palm wax. It's not just to make the limes look shiny.
Fruta es para poner como una capa sobre la fruta que le va a ayudar a su vida de anaquel o a que la fruta tenga una mayor vida, pues que no se deshidrate y que no se madure tan pronto.
Throughout their journey in the factory, the limes will get sorted multiple times. Some stations do it by hand, others with fancy tech.
Nuestra máquina consta de un sistema operativo el cual toma de 20 a 40 fotos a cada fruta que va pasando.
Using those pictures, the machine separated them based on their size. Ones that aren't the right size will go directly to Mexico's juicing industry. The perfectly sized ones will head on to get exported. But first, there's quality control.
Este limón es para exportación a Estados Unidos. Tenemos un limón con una buena cáscara, un buen color, un color uniforme. Y si lo partimos o lo abrimos, tenemos una buena cantidad de jugo.
After they pass this final test, the limes are ready for packaging and shipping. The majority of the limes produced in this region end up in the United States. Demand for limes has been increasing for decades as Latin American and Asian cuisines became more popular. But in 1994, after a new free trade agreement went into effect, the floodgates for Mexican limes opened. Now, the US is the biggest importer of limes globally, doubling the amount it purchased from Mexico in the last 10 years. To keep up with demand, Mexico increased its production 50% in the same decade. Workers here say that demand is a double-edged sword. On one hand,
El limón es el sustento de miles de hogares, de muchas personas, de muchas empresas y de importación, de exportación de materias primas, fertilizantes. Entonces, esto da comida a muchísima gente.
The U.S. consumes more raw sugar than it can produce and gets more from Mexico than from any other country. But in 2014, U.S. producers accused Mexico of dumping cheap sugar into the market, hurting America's multi-billion-dollar industry. The U.S. government agreed and started limiting Mexican imports the following year. In 2023, a U.S. government report said this helped U.S. sugar producers, but made sugar more expensive for Americans and hurt the economy. Trump has also threatened tariffs on European Union countries, which supply the U.S. with over $20 billion of food a year.
One of our, in a lot of cases, our biggest allies and biggest trade partners. The European Union has already signaled that if Trump puts tariffs on those nations into effect, that they will retaliate and they will do a counter tariff, which means that it will be more expensive to send European goods into the US, and it will be more expensive to send American goods into Europe. It also damaged Trump's relationship with a lot of European and EU leaders.
The U.S. imports more cheese from Italy than any other country, over $400 million worth a year. The region of Puglia is the birthplace of burrata cheese.
In Italy, we met with Vincenzo Titrani, son, grandson and great-grandson of cheesemakers and owner of Mozzabella. His dairy produces about 500 kilos of fresh cheese every day.
Che faccio questo mestiere sono quasi 35 anni. È una cosa che viene tramandata di padre in figlio da 3 generazioni. Il primo casaro della mia famiglia era nato nel 1860, qualcosa del genere.
Questa è una burrata fresca?
E questa è appena fatta, l'abbiamo fatta ora.
Questa è la mia colazione. Sai, quando sono andata in Spagna mi hanno fatto fare colazione con il prosciutto, prosciutto e olio. E giustamente qua in Puglia, caffè e burrata.
Burrata.
Incredibile.
È come un cappuccino.
Sì, beh, il latte c'è. Beh, alla salute.
Buon appetito.
Andato via. Buonissima. It's so creamy, it's incredible. You don't feel that there is like the small little pieces and the outside part, which is harder. It melts in your mouth.
The U.S. imports nearly all of its olive oil, and most of it comes from Spain.
Olive groves stretch across 6.8 million acres of Spain, making the country the largest exporter of extra virgin olive oil in the world. Olive oil production here dates back to the 2nd millennium BC. Andalusia once supplied olive oil for the Roman Empire. But in modern times, Spain hasn't always dominated the market, mainly because the bulk of what it used to produce was a low-quality blend. That changed about 25 years ago, when producers invested in new harvesting practices and machinery. That's what makes today's olive oil higher quality and much more expensive. Farmers unload their crops in processing facilities run by Deku, and a conveyor belt carries thousands of raw olives an hour. They're gently washed to remove any remaining dirt from the groves. But the value of their crop isn't set. The olives have to be taste tested first. Extra virgin olive oil is the least processed. It's extracted not through the use of heat or chemicals, but by grinding the olives and pressing out the oil. That's what makes extra virgin the most expensive type of olive oil. But it's also considered healthier because it retains all of its natural vitamins and antioxidants. First, machines blend the olives into a thick paste.
Pasa a unos molinos de molturación de acero inoxidable de martillo, que son necesarias molturar la aceituna completamente para luego pasar a un batido. El batido es necesario para preparar la pasta de masa de aceituna para la extracción posterior.
Then, massive decanters extract the oil out of the mush. They also keep the olive waste, called alperujo. After it's composted, it's used as fertilizer or fuel. The new olive oil is stored in huge stainless steel tanks. Nitrogen fills the gap at the top of the canister to keep the oil fresh. It's kept in the dark at a constant temperature. Decoop has the biggest olive oil storage facility in the world. It can hold 300,000 metric tons. That's 1/3 of an oil tanker. The tanks can keep oil fresh for up to 2 years. Each batch of olives has a distinct fragrance.
Pues puedo decir que huele como a campo, a tierra húmeda, un olor muy bonito, muy agradable.
Finally, the olive oil is poured into bottles and sealed.
The U.S. gets roughly 75% of its truffle imports from Italy, home to some of the rarest and most expensive varieties in the world. We spent a day with a professional truffle hunter to see how he finds them in the wild.
We're in the woods of Alba, Piedmont, Italy. You can find white truffles growing in these woods and these woods only. These trees, together with the right soil and weather conditions, can only be found in this region of Italy. Together they create this, a surprisingly big truffle, as you can see, but also one with a divine fragrance. Today we're gonna go hunt for more. To find these famous truffles, we must hunt them in the woods where they grow. And because truffles grow underground, unlike mushrooms, I needed to go on the hunt with licensed truffle hunter Gianni and his 2 dogs, Penny and Vito.
Qui comincia la zona tartufigena, la zona dove ci sono le piante che danno il tartufo. Toyu! Lei è un incrocio, non è un cane puro, è un bracco pointer incrociato col beagle, perché sono razze più forti e potenti. Lui è un cane di pura razza, è cane per eccellenza da caccia che si usa in queste zone, è lo spinone italiano. Perché comunque c'è un feeling tra me e il cane. Io oramai conosco il cane, già solo le movenze del cane, come si muove, come muove la coda, io riesco a individuare, a capire se cerca il tartufo o se nell'aria sente l'odore della selvaggina, dell'animale selvatico.
Dogs are the only ones that are actually allowed to dig into this soil. Tools like hoes and rakes are forbidden. If the soil is hard and the truffle is hidden deep down, a truffle hunter, or trifulao in the local dialect, is only allowed to use this small tool called zappino. We visited during a period of heavy drought, so truffles were mostly on the surface and there was no need to use it.
Piglia. Brava.
Eccolo, che cos'è questo?
Questo è un nero. È lo scorzone. Prendi la Penny. Piglia. Gliela. C'è? Dov'è?
Che c'è, che c'è?
Sempre un nero.
Profumato.
Roughly 80% of the seafood Americans eat is imported. Much of it comes from India. It's the top supplier of shrimp, exporting over $2 billion of it to the U.S. a year. But in January 2025, Trump threatened 100% tariffs on India and 9 other countries he suspected were trying to replace the U.S. dollar as their reserve currency.
Out of all the tariffs that Trump has suggested in his second term, the one on India is one of the steepest. The world operates on a lot of different currencies. Think the dollar, yen, pounds. So one of the things that's really important to Trump is that right now, the US dollar is sort of the standard state of currency for international trade. Trump wants to impose tariffs. Not only will it be harder for Indian businesses to send their goods to the US, it will be harder for American businesses to get the seafood and spices that they need for their products.
But tariffs on Indian seafood could benefit American shrimpers, who have struggled to compete with cheaper imports.
Shrimpers like Captain Lonnie Mayu Jr. are facing skyrocketing costs of operating a boat.
You're wasting fuel and ice if you don't catch anything.
Since the 1980s, he says a block of ice has gone from $14 to $26 today. A set of new nets more than doubled, and a gallon of gas more than tripled in price. At 82 years old, Lonnie, who goes by Knuckles, hasn't given up trawling these waters, even after 6 decades. Starting in May, he heads out to catch brown shrimp, usually around sunset.
You have to go do your homework and know where they're going to be at.
He works independently, like most of the shrimpers here.
Right about there. A little too far.
During the day, brown shrimp may bury themselves in the sediment to hide from predators. But after dark, they often come out and roam in shallow water. Knuckles and his deckhand Steve drop these nets that skim the top of the water.
We're not dragging anything on the bottom.
He positions himself against the current, so the shrimp fall right into his nets.
The shrimp are not like fish. They can't really swim that great. They take a ride on the current.
Knuckles and Steve will pick out and keep just the shrimp. Sea turtles have an escape hatch in the net, and other animals get thrown back into the sea, where some dolphins are waiting to chow down on them.
If we don't pick up in their favor often enough, they'll take and bite it out of the net.
They can literally rip a 4-foot hole in it, which is going to take a lot of time to fix.
Like this one. Knuckles pulls up the net so he can sew it closed.
You're going to lose everything, you know? You're going to be working for literally nothing.
This work can be grueling. Some shrimpers have big enough vessels they can stay out for weeks at a time. Knuckles has a smaller boat, so he fishes just until morning.
But it keeps you in shape.
But even after all this work, there's a chance they could have a bad run. Tonight, most of the nets were full of catfish.
Ooh, catfish.
You see your belly? They're full of shrimp.
Full of shrimp. They went in the net, ate all the shrimp. We ain't got a pound of shrimp. It's all catfish. I'm gonna try pushing up, going a little further up in the lake or something.
Knuckles spent $45,000 buying and fixing up his boat. It was meant to be his ticket to retirement. But now he's unsure that plan will work.
You know, for me to get out the business, I gotta sell it. I got no retirement, but I can't sell a boat. Can't give it away. Nobody wants it.
And most shrimpers agree it's getting harder to justify going out.
For this boat to leave the dock, it's gonna cost me over $1,000. It's killing us. The farmers is killing us.
Right now, nobody want to do it no more because they're struggling.
Milena Cheeve has been fishing for 8 years. Like 60% of the state's shrimp boat owners, she and her husband are originally from Southeast Asia.
With our education, there's nothing else we could do besides fishermen, especially like me and my husband, like in our mid-50s.
Milena and her husband weren't able to go to college, but they hoped shrimping would help their kids do the opposite. Dock owners are feeling the impact too.
Because if we don't bring no shrimp, they don't make no money either. You know, when the shrimp boats go out, they're gonna kill the docks too. That's a pretty shrimp.
Dean Blanchard's family has been buying and selling local shrimp for 5 generations.
I was born in a shrimp dock. When I was a baby, they used to put me in a shrimp box.
His dock, 2 hours south of New Orleans, was once one of the biggest shrimp suppliers in the country. But last year, he paid the lowest prices he ever has for the larger shrimp.
30-some years ago, they went down from $5 to $1.30.
That's because he's selling it for so little to the peeling factories.
Right now, it's the cheapest I ever seen in my life. I'm sick to my stomach. I ain't never seen nothing like this. Never in my life seen it this bad.
In February 2025, Trump imposed a 10% tariff on Chinese imports, including food. In March, he increased it to 20%. China retaliated with 10 to 15% tariffs on many U.S. goods.
The biggest retaliation so far, sparking a trade war.
China supplies roughly 80% of the world's garlic, and the U.S. is one of its biggest customers. U.S. garlic producers like Christopher Ranch have accused China of undercutting the American garlic market.
The U.S. started to import cheap garlic from China shortly after the Cold War. But Chinese bulbs sold for almost 50% less than American ones. The US government accused Chinese producers of trying to gain a monopoly by selling garlic for less than what it takes to grow it, also known as dumping. By the mid-90s, Christopher Ranch sales had fallen by half, and the company started laying off workers. The US government tried to control it with anti-dumping duties in 1994. But Chinese imports continued, and by 2004, the US was importing over half of the garlic it consumed. Between 2001 and 2005, Christopher Ranch had slashed the land it farmed by 40%. And during this period, the US garlic industry was losing an estimated $600 million to Chinese imports. Meanwhile, in China, garlic was beating gold stocks, becoming the country's most lucrative asset.
Before the 1990s, nearly all the garlic consumed in America was grown in America. There used to be 12 commercial garlic growers in the country. Now we're down to 3.
And Ken often spoke about it, even on TV, as seen in this clip.
He's just back from Washington, D.C., where he lobbied to help win a new 10% tariff on Chinese garlic.
One of the hardest things I've ever done was actually going to D.C. and testifying and offering evidence that the Chinese continue to impact and negatively hurt the domestic garlic industry.
The U.S. imposed 25% tariffs on all Canadian food imports, which total roughly $40 billion a year. Canada retaliated with tariffs on U.S. goods.
It is one of our biggest allies, our biggest trade partners. Things that we rely on Canada for, like cereal and meat and maple syrup, are going to become more expensive.
The U.S. imports roughly $5 billion of cocoa products a year from Africa, including 2/3 of its cocoa beans. Countries like Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire are a vital source of beans for big U.S. chocolate companies like Mars Wrigley. But a virus called swollen shoot is killing cocoa trees across the continent and causing the price of chocolate to soar around the world.
Joseph Sasu starts harvesting his 17 acres of cocoa in the central region of Ghana in October. Inside this healthy pod are the pearly white cocoa beans that will become chocolate. But in the last few years, Joseph has been finding more sick pods like this, completely black or covered in white fuzz. They've been infected with an incurable virus called swollen shoot. Tiny mealybugs spread the virus as they feed on the sap of the cocoa trees. Once it takes hold, the leaves can become discolored or die back. Stems might swell, and smaller pods may form. After a few years, swollen shoot can kill the plant. Ghana and Ivory Coast grow more than half of the world's cocoa crop. But for the 3rd straight season, there hasn't been enough cocoa to meet global demand. This year, farmers are projected to harvest over 700,000 metric tons less than the previous season. Now, nearly a third of cocoa farmland in Ghana is infected.
Last year, so they told more into cocoa. After all, say a cocoa base 20 bars krano. Make us imu half the etuguye.
The only way to stop the spread is by cutting down the infected trees and planting new ones, which can take 4 years to grow fruit.
Imagine from a smallholder's perspective, you're faced with a choice of eliminating your potential to earn an income, or keeping that tree going for as long as you can.
That's Christy Liesel, a 20-year veteran chocolate scholar.
The longer you keep a tree around with swollen shoot virus, the more chance it has to spread to surrounding trees.
Joseph has already removed about 1,500 infected trees within the last 5 years.
Because we have no line, cocoa blew a meet much less cocoa do every a debate 100 years. I am a nana and more any years I cocoa.
South America supplies the U.S. with roughly $15 billion worth of food a year. Since 2020, the U.S. has relied more on Brazil for fresh beef after droughts lowered other countries' exports. Peru and Bolivia produce most of America's quinoa and are the world's biggest exporters of the ancient seed.
In the U.S., the product has become increasingly popular. America imports about a third of all the world's quinoa. But it wasn't always this way. quinoa used to be mostly unknown outside of the Andes.
El precio, y era muy barato. La gente no quería quinoa.
But it all began to change in 2009, when the Peruvian government started establishing free trade agreements. It became easier for companies to export to the US and beyond. Over the next few years, commerce between Peru and the US reportedly boomed. Word spread about the nutritious superfood that was gluten-free and high in protein.
This was when stuff like the keto diet were taking off, and there was this conventional wisdom that, hey, look, among all of those grains that you can be eating, quinoa probably packs the strongest punch in terms of protein.
The United Nations even declared 2013 the International Year of Quinoa to celebrate the ancestral practices of the Andean people.
Basically, shining a big, bright spotlight on quinoa as something that people should consume for their health, and that really led to the whole thing.
It's not unprecedented for a president to impose tariffs. What's unique about Trump's tariffs right now is the scale. He is imposing them against many of America's top trade allies where we get a lot of our products, especially our food products. Historically, tariffs have not had a super good economic impact. They always raise prices. But one of the things that works with tariffs that makes somebody like President Trump really adhere to them is that they produce revenue for the government. He said it's a tax on another country, but it's really a tax on the supplier of the good trying to bring them into the United States. So who actually pays for that in a lot of ways is not only the supplier, the distributor, the retailer, it's the American consumer. Who actually makes money from this is actually the US government.